The Vampire King had lived for 700 years and said goodbye to everyone he'd ever cared about, but tonight he couldn't seem to make his feet move down the stairs from her apartment door. Roslyn Davenport fumbled with her keys, hyper-aware of Iskander Fane standing so still behind her that she could have convinced herself he wasn't breathing, except she'd heard him do exactly that all evening at the party they'd just left. She'd watched his chest rise and fall in perfectly human rhythm while he sat on the arm of a couch, holding her drink every time she went to the bathroom, returning it without comment, his pale eyes tracking her movements through the crowded living room like she was the only fixed point in a world of motion. The key finally slid home. She turned it, heard the bolt click, and found herself trapped in the strange crystallized moment between polite dismissal and wanting desperately for him to stay. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him, "for walking me back. You didn't have to." Iskander stood on the welcome mat she'd bought 3 weeks ago when she moved into this apartment, the one that said, "Home, Sweet Home." In letters she'd found cheerful and defiant. The porch light caught his white hair, made his skin look like carved marble, emphasized the severe elegance of his features. He wore a black coat over a dark shirt, and he looked exactly like what he was. Something old and dangerous dressed in modern clothes, standing in the yellow glow of a motion sensor light in a modest apartment complex in the middle of a city that never quite slept. "I did," he said simply. 2 words. They shouldn't have made her pulse skip. Roslyn had met him 3 hours ago at a party thrown by her coworker Mara, one of those sprawling gatherings where people spilled from living room to kitchen to balcony, music pounding, conversations blurring into noise. She'd only gone because Mara had insisted, because Mara knew Roslyn had spent the last 6 months barely leaving her apartment except for work after the breakup, after Derek had finally shown his true colors in spectacular fashion. She'd been standing alone by the drinks table, trying to look occupied, when Iskander had simply appeared beside her. "You don't want to be here," he'd said, not a question. She'd looked up, startled by his height, his presence, the strange formality of his speech. "Is it that obvious?" "To me." He'd studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "But I suspect most of these people don't see past their own enjoyment." "Are you always this direct?" Something that might have been amusement had crossed his face. "I've found that time is too valuable to waste on pretense." They'd talked, or rather, she'd talked, and he'd listened with a focus that felt like being seen under a spotlight. When she'd excused herself to the bathroom, he'd taken her cup without asking. When she'd returned, he'd handed it back, and she'd noticed the way his fingers had stayed curved around the rim, keeping it safe, keeping it his until she reclaimed it. It had happened 3 more times over the course of the evening, each time that wordless exchange. Each time, the growing warmth in her chest that someone was paying attention, that someone cared enough about her small safety to guard her drink in a room full of strangers. Now, he stood at her door, and the silence stretched between them like a living thing. "I should let you rest," Iskander said, but he didn't move. "I'm not that tired," Roslyn heard herself say, and wondered where the words came from, whether they were true. She was tired. Bone-tired from the effort of being social, from smiling, from pretending she was fine when Derek had taken so much of her confidence that she still felt hollow. But she wasn't tired of Iskander's presence, wasn't ready for it to end. His eyes caught the light, almost luminous. "It's late. Is it past your bedtime?" The joke came out softer than she'd intended, almost tentative, testing whether humor was allowed in whatever this moment was. "I don't sleep much." He paused, and she watched something work behind his expression, some decision being made and unmade and made again. "Roslyn." Her name in his mouth sounded different, ancient, careful. "Yes? May I see you again?" The question hung in the cool night air between them. Behind her, through the thin walls of the apartment, she could hear her neighbor's television, the distant sound of traffic from the main road. Ordinary sounds. Human sounds. Iskander looked carved from a different world entirely, standing so still he could have been a statue, waiting for her answer like it mattered more than anything else in his long, impossible life. She didn't know what he was yet. Didn't know that he ruled a kingdom beneath the city, that he held court in chambers carved from stone older than her country, that he'd watched empires rise and fall and had stopped letting himself care somewhere around the 3rd century of his existence. She only knew that he'd kept her drinks safe, that he'd walked her home, that he'd stayed when he could have left, and that she wanted to say yes with an intensity that frightened her. "I'd like that," she said. He smiled then, barely a curve of his mouth, but it transformed his face from austere to beautiful. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow I work until 6. I'll meet you." "You don't know where I work. Tell me." She gave him the address of the bookstore where she spent her days shelving returns and helping customers find recommendations, where she felt safest among the stacks, among stories that had clear endings. He listened like he was memorizing every word, like he would carry this information away and keep it precious. "Tomorrow, then," he said, and finally he moved, stepping backward off the mat, down one step, then another. Roslyn watched him go, watched him pause at the bottom of the stairs and look back up at her, watched something complicated cross his features in the moment before he turned and walked into the parking lot, his coat moving around him like wings. She went inside and closed the door and leaned against it, her heart doing strange things in her chest. She didn't see him stand in the shadows for another hour, watching her window, unable to leave even after she'd turned out the lights. The bookstore smelled like old paper and new coffee from the cafe next door, scents that had become comfort over the past year Roslyn had worked there. She was shelving poetry, a small stack of Mary Oliver and Pablo Neruda, when the bell above the door chimed and Iskander walked in at precisely 6 o'clock. He looked out of place among the warm wood and soft lighting, too sharp, too defined, like a figure from a classical painting stepping into a photograph. He found her immediately, his gaze cutting across the space between them, and Roslyn felt her hands still on the shelf. "Hi," she said, suddenly aware of her messy bun, her store apron, the dust probably smudged on her cheek. "Hello." He approached slowly, giving her time to adjust to his presence. "You work among stories. Someone has to keep them organized." She slid the last book into place. "Give me 5 minutes to close out." He nodded, and while she cashed out her register and said goodbye to her manager, she watched him move through the aisles, his fingers trailing along spines, his attention caught by titles she couldn't see from her position. There was something hungry in the way he looked at the books, something that spoke of a deep and old love. They walked to a small restaurant 2 blocks away, the kind with mismatched chairs and art on the walls, where the lighting was low and warm. Roslyn ordered pasta, watched Iskander request only wine, and tried not to wonder why he didn't eat, why his skin was so pale, why he moved like gravity affected him differently than it did the rest of the world. "Tell me about yourself," she said, twirling fettuccine around her fork. "What would you like to know?" "Anything, everything. Where you're from, what you do, why you were at Mara's party." He considered her questions like they were riddles requiring careful answers. "I'm from very far away. I manage certain interests in the city, and I was at the party because I was invited by someone who works in my organization." "That's wonderfully vague. I'm a private person." "I noticed." She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "My turn? You get to ask me things? Why did you look so unhappy last night?" The directness of it stole her breath. She set down her fork, reached for her water, bought herself time. The honest answer felt too raw, too soon, but something about the way he watched her, patient and unwavering, made her want to try. "I was in a relationship that ended badly," she said finally. "He was controlling. He made me feel small. And when I finally got out, I realized I'd lost touch with most of my friends, that I didn't know how to be around people anymore without second-guessing everything I said or did. Mara's been trying to help me remember how to be social. Last night was practice." Iskander's expression had gone very still. "This man, he hurt you. Not physically, just every other way. Does he still bother you?" There was something in his voice, something cold and dangerous that made her look up sharply. His eyes had darkened, or maybe that was a trick of the light. "No," she said. "I blocked him on everything, changed my number. He doesn't know where I live now." "Good." The word came out soft but absolute, like a door closing. They talked for 2 hours, through her meal and his wine, through dessert she ordered and he declined. He asked about her childhood, her family, her love of books. She asked about his interests and got careful answers about art and history and music, about places he'd traveled, always framed in ways that didn't quite give away how long he'd been alive. She didn't push. There was something building between them, something fragile and important, and she sensed that trust would come in layers, that whatever secrets he carried would be revealed when he was ready. When he walked her home again, she found herself hoping he would linger. He did. This time they stood outside her door for 20 minutes, talking about nothing important, about the weather and the city and the broken light in the parking lot that kept flickering. His coat kept him warm, but she shivered in the October chill, and eventually he noticed. "You should go in," he said. "Probably." "Tomorrow?" he asked, the same way he had the night before, like he was making sure, like he needed confirmation that this was real, that she wanted this too. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He left slower this time, looking back twice, and Roslyn went inside, wondering what it meant that a man who seemed so controlled, so certain, kept hesitating at her threshold like he was fighting himself just to walk away. Tomorrow became the day after, became a week, became two. Iskander met her after work every day, appeared exactly when she finished her shift, waited if she ran late. They went to restaurants and museums and quiet bars, always places where they could talk, where the lighting was low enough that his unusual appearance drew less attention. He never ate in front of her, only drank wine or water, and she stopped asking why because it seemed to make him tense. He was educated in ways that made her suspect private tutors or extensive travel, could discuss literature and art with the kind of depth that came from seeing things firsthand rather than studying them in books. He had opinions on architecture that suggested he'd watched cities grow and change, and once, looking at a painting in a gallery, he'd mentioned details about the artist's technique that the placard hadn't included, then had gone quiet when she'd asked how he knew. They never ran out of things to say. More surprisingly, they were comfortable in silence, could sit on a park bench watching the autumn leaves fall without needing to fill the space with words. Roslyn felt herself unfurling slowly in his presence, remembering how to trust her own thoughts, how to speak without mentally editing everything first. Derek had always interrupted, had always needed to correct or explain or demonstrate that he knew better. Iskander listened like her words mattered, like he would remember everything she said and keep it somewhere safe. On their 9th evening together, sitting in her apartment for the first time because it had started raining during their walk and she'd invited him in without thinking, Roslyn asked the question that had been building. Why me? They were on her couch, a careful foot of space between them, mugs of tea cooling on the coffee table. Rain streaked the windows, created a soft percussion that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Iskander turned to look at her, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight. What do you mean? You could have your pick of anyone. You're educated, well-traveled, clearly wealthy given the places we've been going. She gestured vaguely at his face, extremely attractive. So why are you spending all your time with someone who's still rebuilding herself after a bad relationship, who works at a bookstore and lives in a tiny apartment? Your apartment is perfect, he said immediately. It's warm, it's you, and you're not rebuilding yourself, Roslyn. You're remembering who you were before someone tried to convince you to be smaller. The observation landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples outward. As for why you, he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, because when I saw you at that party, you were the only person there who wasn't performing. Everyone else was projecting a version of themselves they wanted others to see. You were just standing there, uncomfortable and honest, and I found myself unable to look away. Because you're kind and thoughtful, and you notice things like how you always ask after the elderly man who comes to the bookstore on Tuesdays, or how you leave extra change in the tip jar when you think I'm not watching. Because talking to you feels like the first real conversation I've had in, he paused, seemed to catch himself. In longer than I care to admit. Roslyn's throat had gone tight. Iskander. Yes? Can I ask you something? And will you give me a real answer? He went very still. That depends on the question. What are you? The silence that fell between them was different from the comfortable quiet they'd shared before. This one was weighted, heavy with consequence. She watched him struggle with it, watched emotions flicker across his usually controlled features, concern and fear, and something that looked almost like relief. If I tell you, he said carefully, everything changes. If you don't, this can't go any further. She said it gently but firmly, needing him to understand. I like you, really like you, but I can feel that you're holding back something big, and I can't build something real on secrets. He stood, moved to the window, his back to her. Rain ran down the glass in sheets, distorting the lights of the city beyond. She watched his shoulders rise and fall with a breath he didn't need, watched his hands clench and unclench at his sides. I'm a vampire, he said to the window. I'm 700 years old. I rule the court beneath this city, a kingdom your world doesn't know exists. I drink blood to survive. I cannot walk in sunlight, and I will watch everyone I care about grow old and die while I continue, unchanging, forever. Roslyn sat very still on the couch, her mind trying to process words that should have been impossible, that would have been impossible from anyone else. But they explained everything. His pallor, his stillness, the way he never ate, the old knowledge in his eyes, the formal cadence of his speech. Prove it, she whispered. He turned from the window, and his eyes had changed, had gone luminous and strange, a pale fire burning behind them. When he opened his mouth, she saw the fangs, delicate and deadly, and her hindbrain screamed danger, even as her heart said she had always known, some part of her had always known he was other. He closed his mouth, and the fangs retracted, and his eyes faded back to their usual pale gray. He stood across the room looking at her like he expected her to scream, to run, to throw him out, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. You're a vampire king, apparently. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, needed to hold herself together while her worldview rearranged itself. Are there a lot of you? He blinked, clearly not expecting this reaction. Enough. We keep ourselves hidden. Have you killed people? Yes. No hesitation, no excuse. Not recently, not in this century. We have laws now, sources that are willing, that are compensated. But in the past, yes, she should have been afraid. She was afraid, but it was a distant fear, drowned out by the simple fact that this was Iskander, who had kept her drink safe, who walked her home, who listened to her stories about difficult customers at the bookstore like they were fascinating. This was the man who had looked at her like she mattered, who had never once made her feel small or stupid or less than. Are you going to hurt me? She asked. Never. The word came out fierce, absolute. Roslyn, I would destroy anyone who tried to harm you, including myself if I thought I was a danger. Then we figure this out, she said simply. He crossed the room in movement too fast for human, was suddenly kneeling in front of her, his hands hovering near her knees but not touching, like he didn't dare. Up close, she could see the slight luminescence to his skin, the way he was too perfect, too symmetrical, carved rather than born. You're not afraid, he said, and it sounded like wonder. I'm terrified, she corrected, but not of you, of this maybe, of what it means. But you've had weeks to hurt me if you wanted to. You've been nothing but kind. So either you're playing a very long game or you actually care about me, and I don't think you're that good an actor. His hands finally settled on her knees, his touch cool even through her jeans. I care about you more than I have cared about anything in centuries. That's why I kept lingering at your door. That's why I couldn't make myself leave. I've said goodbye to everyone I've ever loved, Roslyn. Everyone. They age and die, or they leave and I remain. I learned not to linger, not to draw out partings because they all become final eventually. But with you, I found I couldn't say goodbye at all. I still can't. I stand at your door and try to make my feet move and they won't, because some part of me knows that every goodbye could be the last one, and I'm not ready for that, not with you, possibly not ever. Her eyes stung with tears she didn't want to shed. I'm human. I'm going to age. I'm going to die. I know. His voice broke on it. And you still want this? I have wanted nothing else since I saw you. His hands tightened fractionally on her knees. I know it's selfish. I know I should walk away, spare us both the inevitable pain, but I can't. I've tried. Every night I tell myself it would be kinder to disappear, and every evening I'm back at your bookstore, waiting. Roslyn reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face. His skin was cool and smooth, and she felt him go absolutely motionless under her palm, like her touch was something sacred. "I don't want you to disappear," she said. "I want you to stay." "For how long?" "For as long as we have." He closed his eyes, leaned into her touch, and she felt dampness on her palm and realized with shock that he was crying. She'd never seen him cry, hadn't been sure he could, and the sight of tears tracking down that marble face broke something open in her chest. She pulled him closer, and he came, let her wrap her arms around him while he buried his face against her shoulder and shook with 700 years of goodbyes he'd never let himself properly feel. They stayed like that until the rain stopped and the city lights beyond the window blurred into dawn. Roslyn called in sick to work the next day, the first time she'd done so for reasons that weren't illness. She and Iskander sat at her kitchen table as morning light grew beyond the curtains, and he told her everything. He described the court beneath the city, the vast chambers carved from bedrock, the society of vampires who lived in the shadows of the human world. He explained the hierarchy, his role as king, the laws he'd spent centuries helping to codify. He talked about the blood bonds, the willing donors who were compensated and protected, the strict regulations against hunting humans, against exposure. "We've learned to coexist," he said, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he wouldn't drink, holding it for the warmth alone. It took a long time. There are still some who resist the modern ways, who remember the old nights of hunting. But most of us prefer this: stability, safety, the ability to exist without constant fear of discovery and persecution. Roslyn listened, asked questions, let the reality of this hidden world sink into her understanding. It should have sounded insane. It did sound insane, but the evidence sat across from her, beautiful and impossible, and she couldn't deny what her own eyes showed her. "What happens now?" she asked when the explanations wound down. "That depends on you." He set down the mug, met her eyes. "The court will need to know about you eventually, about us if there is an us. They'll have concerns about security, about exposure. Some will argue against it." "And what do you argue?" "That you're mine to protect, and I will hear no challenge to that." The possessiveness in his voice should have set off alarms after Derek, after the controlling behavior she'd fled. But this was different. This wasn't about limiting her or diminishing her. This was about standing between her and danger, about claiming her as his responsibility in a world that apparently operated on codes she didn't yet understand. "I can't enter your world," she said slowly, working through the logic. "I'm human. I have a job, a life, sunlight. I know. And you can't fully enter mine. You can't go to brunch on Sunday morning or take a beach vacation. No. So we exist in the spaces between." He nodded, something like relief crossing his features that she understood, that she was thinking practically about logistics rather than running. "I can work with that," Roslyn said, "but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't make decisions for me. Don't hide things because you think you're protecting me. Don't try to control who I see or where I go. I need this to be a partnership, not another cage." Understanding flickered in his eyes, and with it, anger. "The man who hurt you. He controlled you." "Yes. I am not him." He said it with such intensity that the air seemed to vibrate. "I will never be him. You are not someone to be controlled, Roslyn. You are someone to be cherished, protected, respected. If I ever make you feel otherwise, you tell me immediately, and I will correct it." "Okay." She reached across the table, took his hand. "Then we try this? We figure it out as we go." His fingers interlaced with hers, cool and strong. "I would like that very much." They sat in the growing daylight, holding hands across her small kitchen table, while the city woke up beyond the walls and began its ordinary day, unaware that one of its citizens had just stepped into an extraordinary world. 3 weeks later, Roslyn was closing the bookstore alone on a Thursday evening when Derek walked in. She recognized him immediately despite the months that had passed, felt her stomach drop and her hands go cold. He looked the same, confident, handsome in a conventional way, with the kind of smile that had charmed her once and now just made her want to run. "Roslyn," he said warmly, like they were old friends, "I heard you were working here." "We're closing," she managed, hating how her voice shook. "I just need a minute." He approached the counter where she stood, moving into her space the way he always had, using his height to intimidate. I wanted to see how you were doing. I've missed you. I haven't missed you. Please leave. Don't be like that. His smile didn't waver. I know things ended badly, but I've been thinking about you, about us. I think we made a mistake. Breaking up. You made me feel worthless, Roslyn said, anger cutting through the fear. You criticized everything I did, isolated me from my friends, made me doubt every thought I had. That wasn't a relationship, Derek. That was abuse. His expression flickered, something cold showing through the charm. That's dramatic. I was trying to help you improve yourself. By tearing me down? By showing you your potential. He leaned against the counter, too close, always too close. You're so sensitive, Roslyn. You always took everything the wrong way. The gaslighting was so familiar it made her nauseous. She'd spent 6 months in therapy unpacking exactly this, learning to trust her own perceptions again, learning that his version of events wasn't truth, just manipulation. I'm calling the police if you don't leave, she said, reaching for her phone. His hand shot out, grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm, controlling. Let's not be hasty. I just want to talk. The door chimed. Derek's hand dropped from her wrist as Iskander walked in, and Roslyn had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. He must have sensed something wrong, must have arrived early because he was supposed to meet her in 15 minutes. He took in the scene instantly, her pale face, Derek's proximity, the tension crackling in the air. Roslyn, Iskander said calmly, his eyes never leaving Derek. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said. Derek was just leaving. Derek straightened, sizing up Iskander with the kind of competitive assessment men did when establishing hierarchy. Roslyn watched him take in the expensive coat, the aristocratic features, the absolute confidence in Iskander's bearing, and saw him decide to push anyway. I'm an old friend, Derek said, just catching up. You're making her uncomfortable. Iskander moved further into the store, and there was something predatory in the way he walked, something that made Derek take an involuntary step back. Leave. This is a public place. It's a private store that's closed. You're trespassing. Iskander was next to Roslyn now, a solid presence at her side. I won't ask again. Something in his voice made the threat explicit. Derek looked between them, seemed to calculate his odds, and apparently didn't like what he found. He backed toward the door, hands raised in mock surrender. Whatever, man. She's not worth the trouble anyway. He looked at Roslyn. You always did need someone to fight your battles for you. Good luck with this one. Then he was gone, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him, leaving Roslyn shaking with adrenaline and relief. Iskander turned to her immediately, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Did he hurt you? No, just scared me. She realized she was trembling and hated it, hated that Derek could still make her feel small. That was him, the ex. Yes. Iskander's expression went cold in a way she'd never seen, his eyes beginning to glow with that otherworldly light. His name? Derek Morrison. Why? Because I'm going to ensure he never comes near you again. There was something in his voice that made her think of violence, of the predator beneath the gentleman's exterior. She put a hand on his chest, felt the slow beat of his heart under her palm. Don't kill him, she said quietly. I wasn't planning to. He covered her hand with his. But he will understand consequences if he approaches you again. She should have argued, should have insisted she could handle it herself. But the truth was, Derek had always known how to undermine her, how to make her doubt herself, and the relief of having someone stand between them was overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. Iskander pulled her into his arms, and she went gratefully, pressed her face against his chest, and let herself shake while he held her steady. They didn't know that Derek stood in the parking lot, watching through the window, taking photos on his phone. They didn't know that he was already texting someone, a group he'd gotten involved with months ago, people who were very interested in stories about creatures who weren't quite human. The next 2 weeks were perfect in the way that things are perfect, right before they shatter. Iskander introduced Roslyn to his world gradually, carefully. He took her to the entrance of the court, a hidden door in the basement of an old building downtown, showed her the stairs that spiraled down into bedrock. He didn't take her further yet, wanted her to adjust slowly, but just seeing the threshold made it real in a new way. She met Lysander, his second-in-command, a vampire even paler than Iskander, with silver eyes and a reserved demeanor. Lysander had assessed her carefully and said, "She has a good heart. Protect it, my king." They established routines. Iskander waited for her after work, and they spent evenings together in her apartment or walking through the city after dark. He brought her books from the court's library, volumes in languages she couldn't read but that he translated for her, his voice turning poetry into music. She cooked dinners she ate alone while he watched, content just to be in her presence. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give. They held hands, sat close, shared gentle touches, but he seemed content to let her set the pace, to let trust build naturally. After Derek's constant pressure, his neediness disguised as affection, Iskander's patience felt like cool water after a drought. On a Friday night, sitting on her couch with her head on his shoulder, Roslyn said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." She felt him go still beneath her. "You don't have to say anything back," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Roslyn." His voice was rough. "I fell in love with you the first night, standing at your door, trying to make myself leave. I've been in love with you every moment since. I'm terrified of it, terrified of what it means to love something mortal again after I swore I never would. But I love you with everything in me that still remembers how." She turned to look up at him, found his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then were both terrified together. He kissed her then, finally, a gentle press of cool lips that quickly deepened into something desperate and tender. She tasted wine on his tongue, felt the careful control in how he held her, like she was precious and breakable. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will keep you safe," he promised, "whatever comes." She believed him. 2 nights later, everything fell apart. Roslyn was walking home from a late dinner with Mara, her first girls' night in months. Iskander had encouraged her to go, had insisted she maintain her friendships, her human connections. She was texting him that she was almost home when the van pulled up beside her. Everything happened too fast to process. Hands grabbing her, a cloth over her face, chemical smell, the world tilting sideways. She tried to scream, tried to fight, but her limbs went heavy and the darkness swallowed her whole. She woke in a concrete room with a headache like a spike through her skull. The space was small, windowless, lit by a single bare bulb. She was zip-tied to a metal chair, her wrists already aching. Across from her, Derek sat in a folding chair, looking pleased with himself. "You're awake," he said. "Good. I was starting to worry we'd used too much chloroform." "Derek?" Her voice came out hoarse. "What is this?" "This is me saving you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been watching you, Roslyn. Watching you with that thing you've been dating. I know what he is." Cold fear washed through her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie. I've seen him. I have friends who study this stuff, who've been tracking the vampire presence in the city for years. Your boyfriend is the fucking king of them." She said nothing, mind racing, trying to figure out the play here. Derek stood, started pacing. "When we were together, I was trying to help you, trying to make you better, stronger. But you fought me at every turn. Now I find out you're sleeping with a monster, and I realized you need help, whether you want it or not." "I'm not sleeping with him, and he's not a monster." "He drinks blood, Roslyn. He's a parasite, and you've been compromised." Derek stopped in front of her, and she saw the zealotry in his eyes, the absolute conviction. "My friends, they want to study him, understand how they work, and you're going to help us lure him in." "No. You don't have a choice. We've already sent him a message from your phone. He thinks you're in trouble. He'll come for you." Derek smiled, and it was the smile of someone who thought he was the hero of this story. "And when he does, we'll be ready." Roslyn's hands clenched into fists behind the chair. "You have no idea what you're doing. If you hurt him, his people will come for you." "Let them come. We're ready for that too." He crouched down in front of her, reached out to touch her face. She jerked away, and he grabbed her chin, forced her to look at him. "This is for your own good. Someday you'll understand that everything I do is because I care about you." She spat in his face. He backhanded her, snapping her head to the side, pain exploding across her cheekbone. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him stand, heard him leave, heard the lock click behind him. She sat in the concrete room and tasted blood and thought very clearly, Iskander is walking into a trap. The door to the warehouse exploded inward 3 hours later. Roslyn was still zip-tied to the chair, her face swollen, her wrists raw from struggling. Derek and 4 other people were scattered around the space, weapons in hand stakes, crossbows, things that looked jury-rigged but deadly. They'd been waiting, confident and prepared. They hadn't expected Iskander to bring an army. He came through the door like a storm, white hair flying, eyes blazing with that otherworldly light, and behind him poured 24 vampires, all of them moving with inhuman speed and grace. The room erupted into chaos. Derek's friends tried to fight, but it was over in seconds. Vampires disarmed them, pinned them to the ground, their weapons scattered uselessly across the concrete. Roslyn watched it happen in a blur of motion, too fast to follow, and then Iskander was in front of her, his hands cupping her face, his eyes wild with fear and fury. Roslyn! God, Roslyn, what did they do to you? I'm okay, she managed, even though her face throbbed and her wrists were bleeding. It's a trap, Iskander. They wanted... I know. I don't care. He was breaking the zip ties with his bare hands, pulling her up from the chair, checking her for injuries with shaking fingers. I don't care about any of it. Are you hurt? Did they just hit me? I'm okay. She grabbed his arms, needing to ground him, to calm him, before he did something they'd all regret. I'm okay. He pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair, and she felt him trembling with the effort of controlling himself. Around them, his people held Derek, and the hunters immobilized, waiting for orders. Lysander approached carefully. My king, what would you have us do with them? Iskander raised his head, and Roslyn saw the struggle on his face between violence and restraint. His eyes found Derek, pinned to the ground by a female vampire with black hair, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You took her, Iskander said, his voice deathly quiet. You hurt her. I was trying to save her from you, Derek spat back, still defiant, even captured. You're a monster. She deserves better than... He didn't finish the sentence. Iskander was across the room in a blur, had Derek by the throat, lifting him off the ground one-handed. The other vampires stepped back, giving their king space, and Roslyn saw murder in his eyes. Iskander, don't. She moved toward him, her body protesting. He's not worth it. He hit you. Each word was bitten off, barely controlled. He took you, tied you up, used you as bait. He deserves to die. Yes, Roslyn agreed and watched Derek's eyes widen. He probably does. But if you kill him, you're proving him right. You're being the monster he thinks you are. Iskander's hand tightened fractionally on Derek's throat. He will come after you again if I let him live. Then make sure he can't, but don't kill him, please. She was close enough now to touch his arm, to feel the tension vibrating through him. I need you to be better than him. I need you to choose me over revenge. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Iskander dropped Derek to the ground, where he collapsed, gasping. The Vampire King turned away from him like he was nothing, like he'd already been dismissed from consideration, and gathered Roslyn back into his arms. Take them to the court, he said to Lysander without looking back. Lock them in the deep cells. I'll decide their fate when I'm thinking clearly. And if they talk? Lysander asked. If they spread stories about us? No one will believe them. Iskander stroked Roslyn's hair, his touch infinitely gentle despite the violence still coiled in his frame. 5 people claiming vampires are real, with no proof, no evidence. They'll sound insane. But put the word out anyway. These humans are marked. If they approach any of ours again, for any reason, they die. Make sure every vampire in the city knows their faces. It will be done, Lysander gestured, and the vampires began dragging the hunters toward the door. Derek was still coughing, still trying to speak, but no one was listening anymore. Iskander lifted Roslyn into his arms like she weighed nothing, and she let him, too tired and hurt to protest the theatricality of it. I'm taking you home, he said. Your court or mine? Yours, unless you'd feel safer. Yours is fine, she interrupted, realizing she meant it. I want to see it, all of it. He looked down at her, something complicated in his expression. You're in shock. Probably. Take me anyway. So he did, carrying her out of the warehouse and into a night that had turned cold, where more vampires waited in the shadows. They moved through the city like ghosts, and Roslyn watched the familiar streets pass by from the safety of Iskander's arms, her head on his shoulder, her hands fisted in his coat. The court was beautiful. They descended stairs carved from living rock, went down and down until Roslyn's ears popped, until they emerged into vast chambers, lit by something that wasn't quite fire and wasn't quite electric light. The ceilings soared overhead, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to move in the flickering illumination. Tapestries hung on the walls, furniture that looked ancient and priceless filled the spaces, and everywhere she looked, pale-skinned, elegant vampires stopped to watch their king carry a bleeding human through their halls. Iskander took her to his chambers, a suite of rooms decorated in dark woods and deep colors, and set her carefully on a bed that could have slept 5. He disappeared and returned with a first aid kit, and then he was cleaning her wrists with a tenderness that made her want to cry, bandaging the raw skin, checking her pupils for concussion, his hands gentle and sure. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not looking at her face. "This happened because of me, because I couldn't stay away from you." "Don't?" She caught his hands, made him look up. "This happened because Derek is a controlling asshole who couldn't accept that I moved on. That's not on you. He found out about me, about what I am. That put you in danger." "Dating anyone would have put me in danger from him. He couldn't handle not owning me anymore." She squeezed his hands. "You saved me. You came for me." "Of course I came for you." He sounded almost offended that she'd doubt it. "I will always come for you. But this is my world, Roslyn. This is the danger that comes with being close to me. There will be more. Other threats, other people who see you as leverage or a weakness. I can't protect you from all of it. I'm not asking you to." She pulled him up onto the bed beside her, curled into his side despite her aching body. "I'm asking you to let me choose this with open eyes. I know it's dangerous. I know there are risks. I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you." His arm came around her, held her close. "You could have a normal life, find a human man, grow old, have children, never fear the things that exist in the dark." "I could. I don't want to." She tilted her head back to look at him. "I want this. The complicated, dangerous, impossible this. I want you for however long we have." "I will outlive you by centuries," he said, and his voice broke on it. "I will have to say goodbye to you, and it will destroy me. Then we make the time we have matter." She reached up, traced his face, the high cheekbones, the elegant lines. "We don't waste it worrying about the end. We live every moment fully, and when my time comes, you'll have loved and been loved, and that's more than most people get in a single lifetime." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she tasted salt and realized he was crying again. She kissed him back, poured everything she felt into it, all her love and certainty and choice. When they finally broke apart, he held her gaze. "I want to give you something, if you'll accept it." "What?" He moved to a cabinet on the far wall, opened a drawer, and returned with a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, ancient-looking, with a deep red stone that caught the light like captured fire. "This is my sigil," he said, showing her the engraving inside the band. "It marks you as under my protection, as part of my household. Any vampire in the world will recognize it and know you're not to be touched, not to be harmed. It won't stop human threats, but it will keep you safe from my world." She looked at the ring, at the mark of his claim, and thought about Derek's ring, the one she'd worn that had felt like a collar, like ownership. This was different. This was protection freely offered, a gift she could refuse. "It's not a marriage proposal," Iskander added quickly, seeming to read her hesitation. "Just a promise that I will stand between you and anything that tries to hurt you, that you're mine to protect if you want to be. And if I wear it, what does it make me to your court? Treasured, respected, untouchable." He held the ring between them, not moving to put it on her, letting her choose. "My consort eventually, if we get there. But for now, just mine, if you'll have me." Roslyn took the ring from his palm, felt the weight of it, the age. She thought about cages and freedom, about protection and control, about the difference between a man who demanded and a king who offered. She slid it onto her right hand. Iskander's breath caught, and then he was kissing her again, murmuring words in languages she didn't know against her lips, and she understood them anyway in the way they made her feel. She fell asleep in his bed as dawn approached somewhere far above them, safe in the heart of a vampire court, wearing a king's ring, choosing danger and love over safety and solitude. The next weeks brought adjustments. Derek and his hunters remained in the deep cells, while Iskander decided their fate. Roslyn argued for mercy, for memory alterations instead of death, and eventually he agreed, bringing in vampires with abilities that could reshape minds, erase memories, implant new ones. The hunters were released with no recollection of vampires, of the court, of anything beyond their ordinary lives. Derek woke up believing he'd moved to another state for work, his obsession with Roslyn simply gone, edited out of his mind. "It's kinder than he deserves," Iskander said, watching the reports. "It's what I need," Roslyn countered. "To know he's out there living his life, not hurting because of me, even if he hurt me first. I don't want to carry that weight." He'd kissed her forehead and agreed, and she'd loved him more for bending to her compassion. She kept her apartment, but spent more time in the court, learning its rhythms, meeting its people. The vampires were curious about her, this human their king had claimed, and she won them over slowly with genuine interest and respect for their culture. She asked questions, learned their histories, remembered names and preferences. Lysander became an unlikely friend, his reserve thawing into dry humor when she proved she could keep up with his wit. Work became complicated. She couldn't explain her absences, her late nights, the exhaustion that came from splitting her time between two worlds. Eventually, with Iskander's hesitant support, she quit the bookstore and took a position managing the court's library instead, cataloging centuries of books in a dozen languages she was slowly learning. "You don't have to change your whole life for me," Iskander said when she told him. "I'm not. I'm changing it for me. I love books. Now I get to work with books most people don't even know exist." She gestured at the vast library, the rolling ladders, the ancient texts. "This is a dream job." Her apartment became their shared space, the place they escaped to when they wanted to feel normal, to pretend for a while that they were just two people in love. They cooked together, her cooking, him watching, and argued about movies, and fell asleep tangled together as dawn approached. On a night 6 months after the warehouse, lying in bed in her apartment, Roslyn said, "Tell me about your last goodbye." Iskander went quiet beside her. She waited, giving him time, her head on his chest, listening to the slow beat of his heart. "Her name was Elowin," he said finally. "She was human, a scholar. This was 300 years ago. We had 20 years together before age began to take her. I stayed as long as I could, but watching her fade was agony. The last time I saw her, she was in bed, her hair white, her hands fragile. She asked me not to come back, said she didn't want me to watch her die. I kissed her goodbye and left, and she passed 2 weeks later. I didn't go to her funeral. I couldn't bear it." Roslyn pressed closer, offering wordless comfort. "After that, I stopped letting myself care," he continued, "stopped lingering, stopped forming attachments that would hurt when they ended. I ruled my court, I existed, but I didn't let myself feel. And then I saw you at that party, and all the walls I'd built crumbled. You made me want to linger again, made me willing to risk the pain of goodbye if it meant having the time before it." "I'm sorry about Elowin," Roslyn said softly. "I am too. But I'm grateful I had her, even briefly, just like I'm grateful for you, for every moment of this." She tilted her head back to look at him. "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me. You said there are vampires with abilities, mind manipulation, strength, speed. Are there any who can turn humans?" He went very still. "Yes, it's forbidden in most circumstances, requires approval from the oldest courts. Why?" "Because I don't want you to have to say goodbye to me." She said it calmly, clearly, a decision she'd been circling toward for weeks. "I want forever with you, if that's possible. I want to become what you are." "Roslyn," her name came out strangled. "You can't mean that. You'd give up sunlight, your human life, aging, children, everything. I'd gain you. I'd gain time and knowledge and a world I've barely begun to explore. I'd gain forever instead of decades." She sat up, looked down at him seriously. "I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm saying eventually, when I'm ready, when we've talked through every consequence. But I want you to know that I'm thinking about it, that I want to find a way where you don't have to lose me." He pulled her back down, kissed her hard and deep, and she felt his tears wet on her cheeks. "If you're certain," he said against her lips, "if you're certain, challenge every tradition. I will find a way." "I'm certain," she said, "not today, not tomorrow, but someday. I choose forever with you." They made love that night for the first time, a slow and tender claiming that felt like sealing a promise. After, wrapped in each other, Iskander whispered plans for their future, for the petition he would make, for the vampires he would convince, for the life they would build together across centuries. Roslyn listened and believed him, because he was a king and he kept his promises, and because she'd learned that sometimes the most impossible things were also the most true. The petition took 2 years to navigate, 2 years of appearing before councils, of proving her worthiness, of demonstrating that she understood what she would gain and lose. 2 years of living between worlds, of learning vampire law and history, of becoming fluent in languages that would let her speak for herself in the ancient courts. Iskander stood beside her through all of it, advocating, arguing, using every ounce of his authority and influence. Lysander helped, presenting historical precedents. Others from the court spoke on her behalf, testifying to her intelligence, her respect for their culture, her genuine love for their king. In the end, the oldest council agreed, with conditions. She would wait until she turned 30, giving her time to be certain. She would undergo extensive training in vampire law and conduct. She would serve as a bridge between the human and vampire worlds, using her unique position to foster better understanding. She agreed to all of it. On her 30th birthday, in a ceremony deep in the oldest part of the court, surrounded by vampires who had become her family, Roslyn drank from Iskander's wrist and felt the world shift and change. The transformation was agony. 3 days of fever and pain while her body died and reformed, while her heart slowed and her senses sharpened, and everything she was became something new. Iskander never left her side. He held her through the worst of it, whispered encouragement, reminded her why she'd chosen this when the pain made her want to scream. When she woke on the 4th day, the world was different. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, her body stronger and faster, and other in ways she'd have to learn to navigate. She could hear Iskander's heartbeat from across the room, could smell the blood in his veins, could feel the bond between them like a golden thread tying her soul to his. He helped her feed for the first time from a willing donor who understood what she needed, and the taste of blood was strange and heady and right in a way that would have horrified her human self. After, looking at herself in a mirror and seeing her white hair, her pale skin, her eyes that now glowed faintly in the dark, she felt Iskander's arms come around her from behind. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. "Not one," she said, and meant it. They had forever now. Forever to love each other, to build a life together, to navigate the complexities of ruling a court and bridging 2 worlds. Forever to make new memories, to learn and grow and change together. The night she walked in sunlight for the last time, months before her transformation, Iskander had met her at her apartment door as the sun set, just like he had that very first night after the party. "I brought you home safe," he'd said, echoing those early days. "You always do," she'd replied, "and now I'm lingering at your door." "You always do that too." He'd smiled, that rare, beautiful expression that transformed his face. "I still can't say goodbye to you." "Then it's a good thing you'll never have to." Now, years later, transformed and eternal, Roslyn stood with Iskander in the threshold of the chambers they'd made their own, deep in the heart of the court. She thought about beginnings and endings, about the night he'd brought her home and hadn't been able to leave, about how that lingering had changed both their lives. "What are you thinking about?" Iskander asked, pulling her close. "That I walked into your world," she said, "and you walked into mine, and we met in the middle and made something new." "Our own threshold," he agreed, "our own door. And you never have to leave it. Neither do you." She kissed him, this man who was her love and her king, who had lingered at her door because he couldn't say goodbye, who had moved mountains to make sure he'd never have to. Outside their chambers, the court continued its ancient rhythms, vampires going about their lives in the spaces beneath the human world. Above them, the city carried on, unaware of the kingdoms in its foundations, the love stories written in the dark. And in the heart of it all, a vampire king and his consort stood in their doorway, holding each other, finally and forever home, never having to part, never having to say the goodbye that had once seemed inevitable. They had forever now, and they intended to use every moment of it. The years that followed were everything Roslyn had hoped for, and things she'd never imagined. She and Iskander ruled together, modernizing laws, strengthening the bonds between vampire houses, creating new pathways for cooperation with the human world through carefully managed channels. She became known in the courts as the Bridge Queen, the vampire who remembered humanity, who could navigate both worlds with grace. They traveled together, visiting vampire courts in other cities, other countries. Iskander showed her places he'd lived centuries ago, told her stories of his long life, now that they had the time for her to hear them all. She showed him the world through new eyes, found beauty in things he'd stopped noticing, reminded him how to be amazed. They collected moments like treasures, dancing in their chambers to music that spanned centuries, reading in the library surrounded by books in dozens of languages she could now understand. Feeding together, the intimacy of sharing blood becoming another layer of their connection. Fighting occasionally, because immortality didn't erase personality, but always coming back together, always choosing each other again. 10 years in, sitting in a garden deep in the court where someone had managed to grow flowers that bloomed in darkness, Roslyn said, "Do you remember that first night, when you couldn't leave my doorstep?" Iskander, who was sketching her in charcoal, a hobby he'd taken up decades ago and recently returned to, looked up and smiled. "Every detail, the way you fumbled with your keys, the terrible welcome mat, the way you looked at me like you wanted me to stay but were afraid to ask. I was afraid of wanting something, of trusting someone after Derek. And I was afraid of caring again, of setting myself up for another goodbye." He set down the sketch pad, came to sit beside her on the stone bench. "I stood in that parking lot for an hour after you went inside, trying to convince myself to leave and start the process of forgetting you. But I couldn't move. My feet wouldn't carry me away." "Best stubbornness of your life. Without question." He took her hand, the one that still wore his ring, now paired with a wedding band they'd exchanged 50 years after her turning. "I love you more today than I did that night, more than I did yesterday, more than I knew I could love anything. I love you too." She leaned into him, content and complete. "Thank you for lingering. Thank you for inviting me in." They sat in the garden together, surrounded by impossible flowers, living an impossible life, proof that sometimes the best things came from doors that should have closed but stayed open instead. Sometimes goodbye was impossible to say, and sometimes that was exactly how it should be. In the chambers they called home, on a shelf beside ancient books and modern novels, sat a small wooden sign that Roslyn had salvaged from her old apartment before they'd finally let the lease go. "Home, sweet home," it declared in cheerful letters. And it was, for both of them, forever.